Welcome to Research Talk. I'm your host Pancha Hariputra. This is a special episode of Research Talk for the 34th anniversary of the Faculty of Computer Science, Universitas Indonesia. This Research Talk is a webinar series where we invite researchers from all over the world to discuss cutting-edge research in the field of computer science and information systems. So there are more than 500 people, as I mentioned before, registered for today's talk. Students and researchers alike coming from all over Indonesia, from Aceh to Papua. Welcome to the show, everybody. I'd like also to inform you that some of the materials that will be presented today by our speaker are copyrighted by National University of Singapore, so please do not record for other purposes than personal study. So joining us today as a guest moderator, Dr. Adalah Krisnadi, the Chief Editor of Journal of Computer Science and Information, or JICI, who is also our co-director of Tokopedia, Universitas Indonesia, Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence. Welcome to the show, Pak Adalah.
Thank you very much, Mas Pancha. It's a pleasure.
With that said, I'd like to turn it over to Pak Adalah to introduce our special guest and speaker today and moderate the discussion and Q&A session. So take it away, Pak.
Thank you very much. So, right, good afternoon, everybody. It's a great pleasure for me to be here. This is an excellent opportunity for us to learn something new, hopefully, and maybe inspire us to, work on our research and do something more in our academic life. So today we have a special guest, Professor Stéphane Bressan. Professor Stéphane Bressan is a well-known person for us because he visited us couple of times already, and this time we are very happy that he is in his spare time he is willing to give us pointers and probably some discussion on how to do or how to write papers and research in computer science. Let me just read out Professor Bressan's biography for us. So he is a professor at the Department of Computer Science in the School of Computing, National University of Singapore. He has a lot of positions. So he is currently a track leader at the Maritime Information Technology at NUS Center for Maritime Studies. So this shows his multidisciplinary involvement as well. So he is also an NUS affiliate professor at Business Analytics Center and faculty affiliate at the NUS Institute of Data Science. He is also a member of the Image and Pervasive Access Lab, and he worked in the European Computer Industry Research Center, Siemens Munich in the past. He was also part of the leader of the database platform project and PI for the European Ideas Esprit project on intelligent databases. Some of his prior appointments include research associate at the Sloan School of Management at MIT. He received his PhD from Polytechnique Lille and University of Lille in France. So please welcome Professor Stéphane Bressan.
Thank you very much. So maybe before I start, I want to reiterate the fact that I always enjoy visiting you. This time is a virtual visit. I hope we'll be soon able to meet in person in Jakarta, in Singapore. And I understand from Pancha, you have guests or people in the audience from all over Indonesia?
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, I'd love to meet you and visit your universities anywhere you are. So please, contact me if you want to set up collaborations. But I have a message for some of you. Some of you may be doing research in information retrieval and natural language processing. If you just had a PhD, or if you have a PhD in this field, or if you are currently doing a PhD in this field, I'm starting with some of my colleagues a project in Singapore, which is a collaboration with New Zealand on studying question and answer in local languages. So for Singapore, it would be some dialects of Chinese like Hokkien, Checho, but also the Singapore version of the Malay language, which of course is very related to Indonesian. So if you're doing research in information extraction, information retrieval, text-to-speech, natural language processing, and you are in a PhD or you have a PhD, you can email me. And later I will share probably with Putu some job offers that I have, and she can communicate through to your community. All right, so thank you for the invitation. And I was a bit scared when the management of this seminar asked me to do a seminar on how to do research and how to write papers, right? I was thinking, am I the right person to do so? Are my successes, is my list of publication big enough so that I have anything to explain to anybody? So I don't know. What I can do, and that's why I did this mention in the title, I can have a conversation with you and share some of the ideas that are guiding me, especially when writing papers. And when I'm working with my students or with my collaborators, some of the things that I may discuss with them. So I want to discuss that with you. So this is mainly going to be about writing papers. But of course, the question of what research we are putting in the papers is going to come. And it appeared to me also during this presentation that I'm not going to talk too much or even demonstrate anything about how to make a presentation, because making a presentation is yet another topic, which is a little bit different. But I'm going to share some pointers if you're interested in that particular aspect. So the focus of the discussion today, of the conversation today, is about essentially writing papers. And of course, for me, it's computer science because this is the experience that I have. But you will see that maybe we want to broaden the scope of this computer science field. Okay, I think I need to share my screen. So let me see how I can do this properly.
There should be a button. Okay, that's good. That's good.
Yes. So can you see my screen?
Yes, this is spread. Yes, crystal clear.
Okay, and I think I also have shared the sound because I have a couple of videos. So later I will have to check with you whether the videos are playing with the sound. Okay, so in conversation together, so that means this can be an interactive session. I know we have Q&A at the end, but maybe I try and ask you some questions during the talk about doing research, yes, but mostly writing papers. And of course, because of my background and my experience, writing papers in computer science. So let's see. Maybe I share the secret with you immediately in my point of view. What is the secret to doing research and writing papers in every field, and maybe specifically in computer science, but probably for every field? It is read, read, and read again. I tried to illustrate my slides with some pictures. I got them from a website which has some photographs which are free of copyright. And I didn't realize it. I just realized it when I looked closer at the picture that I used for the illustration. This picture was probably taken in Jakarta. If you look closer, this is probably a bookshop in Jakarta or in Georgia, I don't know, near a university. And the woman on the picture is reading a Kamus Psychology. So I think it's a dictionary of psychology, right? So it turned out to be perfect for this seminar. And really, I mean, this is also good for me because I realize when I see a picture like that, and I remember walking in streets like this where near the universities where people are selling books, that when I tell, Indonesian students and researchers you should read, well, they know about it because there are tons of places where you can buy books in Indonesia, physical books. But of course, today we can read, books from the internet in PDF, audio books. So this is all good. Why is the secret to read, read, read? Well, obviously, the first thing we will discuss today is that you need to know what's happening in your domain in order to decide what research you're going to do, what topics you're going to study, and how to write also in order to have some examples or how to communicate with your audience. So you need to read, of course, a lot of research papers in your domain. I mean, that one is kind of obvious. I think, everybody knows it. It's a discipline to take. You must read these papers from your domain in order to keep up to date and to be a productive researcher. Uh, but I think what I want to emphasize today, and this is probably really the main idea I want you to take home after this seminar, is that you should read beyond just your research domain. In particular, you should read in other domains. So if you are a computer scientist doing research in artificial intelligence, maybe you want to read about, I don't know, natural language processing, or you want to read about theory of computing, or you want to read about formal methods, things that maybe have nothing to do with artificial intelligence or your specific interest, but it will give you a lot of ideas to do that. And in fact, I will try and emphasize today that you also need to read beyond your strict domain. So if you're a computer scientist, do read information systems paper, and do read physics papers, and you do read psychology papers, do read medical papers, anything that you can come across. Try and have the discipline to and the curiosity to go and read these things. Of course, your competence will limit your ability to understand everything, but you can start reading those documents, and you can also try to access the literature which is tried to bring to the general public these other sciences. So broaden the scope of the way you are thinking. Don't just think narrowly about your domain, but think very broadly about your domain in a more general context. And in fact, I really want to emphasize that my recommendation, and this is a recommendation I give to my students, is also read novels and books just like you watch movies. Well, it's good because it's entertaining, but it's also good because it's going to be a lot of examples, cultural references, style references, grammatical references. So you're going to improve your writer's capabilities by reading. So it's not just about your research, but it's your writing capabilities. But actually, it's also good for your research, because then your research, as we will see at the end of the talk, is going to be put in context, in the broader context of the society. If you read novels, if you read history books, if you read books about psychology, about philosophy and everything. So you are a student, or you are a researcher because you are curious. Well, the best thing you can do is use this curiosity to look for things to read, and pretty much anything you're going to read is going to add to your capabilities. So read, read, read pretty much anything, and certainly not just papers in your area of interest, although you need to read them, obviously. So just to illustrate the point, these are the things I'm reading at the moment. And I specifically picked those that have nothing to do with computer science. And for each of them, I will explain to you what kind of interest I found in these readings for my job. I'm trying, and I'm really struggling to read Heart of Darkness by Joseph Conrad. So Joseph Conrad is a sort of a classic writer, and I find it very difficult to read. His English is, very advanced for me. I'm not an English native speaker, so I have to make a lot of efforts. And actually, I realized that even trying to read some translations of his books in my native language is difficult. So going through that process of reading this classic novel, where I'm improving sort of my general culture, which is always good, but I'm also learning a lot about writing in the English language. And this is very important. If you want to do that, and the obstacle of this classical, English literature novels is too high, you can go for more modern American literature. An example of such a book is The Perfect Storm by Sebastian Junger. It was turned into a movie. It's a story, it's an adventure of some fishermen in Boston, and the language is relatively easy to read, but it's very correct grammatically. It's not slang, it's very proper American English. So if you read a book like this, you can acquire the style of the author and write very good papers, in English. Another such author is Mo Hayden. She writes very, very interesting novels because they're like Netflix series. You cannot stop. You read one chapter, you want to go to bed, but you can't. You have to read the next chapter. She's British, so the English is very different from American English, but it's very simple as well. So you can decide if you want to write British English to read such authors as Mo Hayden. I'm reading The Perfume also. I read it a long time ago, but I'm reading it again by Patrick Susskind. Is a German writer, so I'm reading obviously the translation in English. And this book is extremely interesting because he's trying to do something which is extremely difficult if you think about it. This book is about perfumes. So he has to write about smell. This is super difficult. We can write about things we see fairly easily, shapes and colors, but describing the sense of a perfume or a flower or something that doesn't smell very good, we don't really have the vocabulary for it. So I find it interesting because as researchers, we are working on some topics in computer science or information systems, which are new topics sometimes, for which the vocabulary doesn't already exist. You cannot just take the vocabulary from everyday life. You have to invent it with the topic that you are talking about. And this is an example of someone who faces such a difficulty. He has to bring the nuances, very fine scientific almost nuances between the perfumes, and he does a great job. So I recommend this book. And by the way, it's not just interesting from this technical point of view, it's a very, very fun book as well, right? So I recommend this book. It is true as well that I am reading a book by an Indonesian writer, so I felt I have to mention it by respect to you guys. I don't know if you have heard about this guy. He's quite famous outside of Indonesia now. I don't know how famous he is in Indonesia. He's very young. He's, I think he's a philosophy graduate from Gajah Mada. And it's called Eka Kurniawan. And his readings are very strange. But they are very interesting to me because they project me in a completely different writing style and literature style from the American English or European style. Already I know there's a difference between a French book, a German book, a British book, or an American book in terms of the structure, the way it's written, the way people think. But when I read an Indonesian book, I discover yet another word. And this is an issue that we're going to have to discuss. How you write in this new multicultural environment in which we are, especially when you come from a culture, I'm French, you guys are Indonesian, we are not American. So we come from somehow not the main culture. And this is a question we have to deal with. And I'm also reading some books in philosophy. I think they are very useful, especially when as scientists, we want to think about our work in the greater context of the society. We need to think about the history of science, the history of thoughts, the history of knowledge, to understand what is our role, especially as academics, but even as engineers, and what is our contribution. So these are the things I'm reading. And you see that although they have nothing to do directly with computer science, when I'm reading these things, I'm actually thinking about my job, and I'm actually learning some good lessons that I can apply for writing papers or for doing research. So this is my recommendation. Look at the word and take lessons and bring them back to your research and writing activity. When I have PhD students, I sometimes recommend books, but at the very least, I recommend 3 things. I recommend to read The Elements of Style by Strunk and White. This is a very small book. The first part was written in 1920 by a professor from Cornell University called William Strunk. I think I'm getting it in the right way. Yeah, I think it was Strunk first. And then his student in 1955, so if I'm not wrong, his student was White, extended the book. And it's a very small book, which is basically telling students from Cornell how to write a paper. And it's about the grammatical rules, where you put the comma, how you use the passive voice, how you use adjectives, etc. So a very small manual of style. You have plenty of similar books now in the libraries. You have the very big Chicago Manual of Style, which publishers are using to tell you how you should write your paper and format your English and your style. But a short version is this one. And again, I mean, read it with a grain of salt, trying to think why we should have these rules and whether they are correct and what we should do with them. Now, I often recommend my student to read a book by Simon Singh. It's called The Code Book. It's a book about computer science for the general public about security. And this is a very good example on how we can communicate the technical things that we are doing to the general public. So this book, I mean, as you know, probably most of you know that security is a very hard topic in computer science, right? Full of math and computing issues that are very complicated. You read this book, you have the impression that you understand everything. So you feel motivated and you're going to go and study more, right? So if you want your papers to be read, you probably want to motivate your audience, and being able to, this guy is really good. So if you learn how to write from Simon Singh, you're going to be able to do a good job. So I recommend this book. Actually, it's also very pleasant. And generally, I recommend my students to read books, again, that make them think about what is their contribution, not just in computer science or in their field, but generally in the society. So such novels as those from George Orwell, 1984, they are very well written. This is classic literature worldwide, I would say. And it helps you think, about the society and about, how, especially our contributions as computer scientists, our ethical responsibility. So read about the style, read examples on how to communicate computer science to the world, like Simon Singh, and read novels, read philosophy, basically, again, read, and read again, not just in your domain. So let us now discuss the key factors that you must think about when you are writing a paper or when you are deciding that you're going to write a paper. In my opinion, these key factors are the following. The topic of your paper, obviously, right? You need to choose a topic. The people you're going to write the paper with, your co-authors, your authors, right? Who are going to be the authors of this paper? And maybe we should think a little bit more about who should be involved in a paper and why. The methodology you're going to adopt. Super, super important. I think we could repeat it 20 times. What is the contribution of your work going to be? because this is what matters, right? A paper is a contribution to science, sometimes engineering. So that contribution must be super clear. You must make sure that it's clear to the readers, it's clear to the authors, it's clear to everybody. Oh, mentioning that, the readers, very often we forget about the readers of our papers. We're writing papers, we're not even thinking about who is going to read it. So we're going to have to talk about this, right? Who is going to read our papers and for what? And finally, I know many of you are, especially if you are academics, member of the faculties, and you are worried about your promotions and your salaries. You know that your conferences and your journals must be listed in Scopus and all that. So we need to choose the venues where we submit our papers, the conferences and journals, very carefully. So let's talk about each of these key factors that determine your decision of how you're going to write your paper one by one. The topic. Don't you have the impression sometimes that research is like fashion? You know, you have to choose a topic which is fashionable. You know, many times I see some motivations which sounds like this. Recent years have witnessed a growing interest in this topic and a large number of publications, blah, blah, blah. So basically, when I read a paper like that, somebody is telling me, I'm doing this research because everybody else is doing it, because it's fashion. Is it really a good argument? You know, let's assume for a minute that this is really fashion, that research is like fashion. So as researchers, what are we? We are fashion designers, right? So if you are a fashion designer, you want to present your new collection for next year, and you want to be recognized as a great fashion designer. Are you going to do a design which is what everybody else is doing? You see, this is a dilemma because you want to do something that everybody likes, but that is also original, that nobody has done before. So just saying, I'm doing this research because everybody else is doing it, well, maybe put you at the disadvantage of, okay, everybody's going to like it possibly, but maybe you're not going to be original. So this is the dilemma we have. I don't have a solution. I'm just saying we have this balance, just like a fashion designer. We need to choose whether we want to balance toward originality or towards, you know, what everybody likes, the existing fashion. And we're supposed to be creating new ideas, right? New ideas cannot be created easily out of the blue. Otherwise, they're never going to be accepted. You know, maybe there's this great fashion designer, he comes out with a new idea that, I don't know, you should wear a shoe on your top of your head, but nobody's going to do that. So you have to be original, but you have also to be accepted. And this is how you want to create a topic. Let me give you some examples in computer science on how you can take the existing work and try and create original ideas in a kind of almost mechanical way. And these are examples that exist. Some of them I worked on, some I didn't. The first example I borrowed from a talk by Jennifer Widom from Stanford. And she's explaining how to get ideas for research in computer science. And she takes the example of a field of research that exists that actually today has flown down to technology. And it's the technology of the HANA database from SAP. I don't know if you heard about this database system, HANA from SAP. It is literally a main memory database. But the idea of main memory database is kind of funny because when it came out for the first time, it looked like a contradiction in term. Database was something you store on the disk. And a researcher said, well, I need a new topic. Let me think about it. What if in the definition of the traditional database research, I change something? So database is data management on the disk. Let me change the on the disk. Data management in main memory. And he got a new topic. So you look at what you have as a topic and you try to change some of the hypotheses. What if databases are not stored on the disk? What happens? I'm going to show you, this is a topic I worked on, trying to follow this idea of main memory database. I did that with some of my colleagues 20 years ago and with some students. Now you assume that the data is on the disk. We just saw you could assume is in the main memory of your computer. We went one step further. We said, what if the data is never stored anywhere in memory? Where could the data be if it's not stored anywhere in memory? It could be on the network. So what if the data is just on the network and you try to build a system that queries, like a SQL system that queries this data? It's called a broadcast disk. You keep broadcasting your data, you never store it. And if you want to ask a question, you have to wait until the data comes to you. You could imagine we are sending the data by email back and forth between Jakarta and Singapore, and we never keep the email anywhere. Only when we receive the email, we can read it, and then we send it back immediately. You see how you could create ideas by just changing some of the hypotheses that we are making traditionally. So to show you other examples, everybody's talking about artificial intelligence. Well, some researchers have said, how about artificial stupidity? And you can Google it. You will see there's some research on artificial stupidity, and it's actually meaningful. Or very important, what about machine learning? Well, let's do machine unlearning, because sometimes you want the machine to forget, for privacy reasons, for instance. So let me work on machine unlearning. So this is a game, right? You can play and you can find some new topics for your research, with the challenge that you have to find something which is in the continuity of what everybody is interested in, but at the same time is original. So it must be the same, but it must be different. This is the challenge of finding a topic. And I think it's not very unlike what happens for the fashion designers. So yeah, you can tell your friend, you're just like a research fashion designer. This is your new job label. So topic, we discussed it, co-authors. Anybody recognize people on this picture? I think you know at least one of the persons there.
Yes, I think so.
Who is this? Who is this?
Mr. Hugo.
It's the famous Hugo, right? Yeah. And I learned a lot from Hugo because he's a musician and he's a jazz musician. And if you know Hugo, he has the ability when he sees people playing to join them and play with them. You've seen him doing that? He goes to a concert, then he asks the musician, can I join you? Can I play with you? And he does a great job. If you have co-authors for your paper, you want that, right? You want that the people join you and bring added value to what you are doing. So choosing your co-authors when writing a paper is like organizing a jazz jam session. You're going to give the topic, which is the theme, but every one of the co-authors should be playing a different instrument so that together around the theme, everybody can improvise and create this good music. So what it means that you should choose your co-authors so that they are complementary. Everyone is bringing something that the others don't have. So of course, you can imagine that you have a band with only bass guitar players. if the musicians are very creative, that could be a good idea. But I don't think, everybody is able to do that. And now think about it. Who are your co-authors? You are a computer scientist, right? Most of your co-authors are computer scientists. Or if you are an information system person, most of your co-authors are information systems. Isn't that wrong? I mean, don't you need like a drummer, a bass guitar player, a guitar player, a keyboard player? Don't just take people who are playing the same instrument as the one you are playing. Of course, maybe already in computer science, we can take a theoretician, an engineer, a specialist of machine learning. So we already can have diversity. But think about this diversity, because research and a paper could be seen just as a piece of music. Several people bringing their own original contribution to the same theme. So maybe we should learn from Hugo and ask him, how you doing that in music? Can we do the same, in computer science? How you jam together for jazz? So choose your co-authors. And I will give you some examples of what I'm doing where I'm choosing my co-authors outside of computer science. Actually, at the moment, the most interesting work I'm doing is with some physicists in quantum physics. And this is fascinating. I'm learning a lot through that, and we're actually coming up with very interesting results in computer science. So again, this is back to the message of, broadening the scope of what you're interested in. Don't just focus on your topic. Computer science, science, the world, everything, philosophy, literature, everything should be of interest to you. This will necessarily improve the relevance of the work that you are doing, because it will put it in a broader context of the rest of the world. Methodology. So this is, if you want, the instruments that everyone is bringing when they are playing together. This is why I have a picture of a toolbox here. And especially for the PhD students or the master students or the undergraduate students who are listening, or even the young faculty members, why would I write a paper with you? Why would I call you and say, oh, do you want to help me with this paper? Because you can play an instrument that I need, because you have one tool that I don't have, or you know how to use very well a tool that I'm not a specialist of. Maybe I can use the hammer very well, but maybe you can use the screwdriver better than me. So I will call you, I say, look, I need someone to help me with this project. Come. So it's very important. It's very important that you focus first on determining what are the tools that you are specialist in. If you go to a jazz session, you want to be able to say, look, I'm a good bassist. I'm a very good bassist. And maybe you can play other things. I know Hugo, for instance, can play the keyboard, can play the bass, can play the harmonica. But, he's able to tell you at which instrument is good and at which instrument is better. So try and think, what is in my toolbox? What are the tools that I'm really good at? And of course, I don't want to hide the fact that I believe that the tools that you need to focus on, it's just, again, like music. If I follow the image, you need to know the theory of music. Where here you need to know the theory of our job in computing is mostly mathematics, right? Probability, statistics, number theory, calculus, algebra, combinatorics, geometry, topology, and logic. So try and figure out which one of those or which ones of those you are good at, you like to use, and which ones are the foundation of your strengths in computer science. Adalah, should I answer I see some questions, or we'll keep them for later, maybe?
Well, you can. It's up to you. If you want to answer the question.
Okay,
first.
maybe this question quickly. how should I read rather than watch a movie? Yeah, of course you can watch movies. There's no problem. There's a lot of interesting stuff on YouTube as well. But since we're talking about writing papers, I think it's very important that that we read, because if you want to know how to write, you have to think about your readers, right? And the best way to think about your readers is to be a reader yourself. So do read, but of course do watch YouTube and watch movies, etc. as well. Okay, the contribution. Well, this is the most important thing, right? I mean, you are publishing for a contribution. You must be able to tell this paper is done for this purpose. And in particular, since we're talking about science, this is the scientific contribution of your paper. So let me move ahead to the section where we're talking about how to write papers. You must indicate your contribution in the abstract, in the introduction, everywhere in the paper, and make sure it's clear in the conclusion of your paper. Okay, there should be zero doubt about what your contribution is, and don't hesitate to repeat it. You know, almost like these books for the kids, where the mom is reading the book for the kid and she repeats the same sentence over and over again. You should repeat the contribution over and over again to make sure it's really clear. But of course, it must be very clear for you first. Now, what is the problem with defining the contribution is that the value of the contribution depends on the reader. Depends on, you know, the value of the contribution is in the eye of the beholder. So that actually brings us to the next topic, which is that one of the super also important element of this picture I'm trying to draw is the reader. So let's see, hopefully you can hear the sound. I'm playing this very short video. Stop me if you cannot hear the sound.
Teachers read texts because they are paid to care about the students. You've learned to write in a system where you're writing to readers who are paid to care about you.
So this is a video from a seminar. I will share the link later. You can go and watch the full seminar from the University of Chicago on how to write research papers. And this is very, very different from most of the lectures or seminars on writing papers that you hear everywhere else. This guy is very thought-provocative. So I really recommend you to go and watch this thing. And here he's saying, you know, maybe the rules that you have learned at school on how to write a good research paper, maybe they are not good because they were written for readers that were motivated to read your paper because they had to grade it. They were your teachers. They were paid to grade your paper, so they were paid to read your paper. And they set the rules for that purpose. But now that you become a PhD student or researcher, nobody is paid to read your paper anymore. People are only going to read your paper if they are interested by what you're going to write, if it's useful to them. So now you must decide of the topic, of the methodology, of the style. You must write your paper in a way that makes it interesting for your readers. So one of the important questions, consequently, when you are writing a paper, when you are submitting it, is who are my readers? Who are my readers so I can make sure I can write for them? And why is what I'm writing is going to keep interesting, be interesting for them? What is the contribution going to be useful to them? What is the contribution going to be from their point of view? So I see a few remarks on text versus video. Maybe we'll have the conversation at the end. And I will also give you pointers about this topic in particular. So who are our readers? If we are researchers in universities, we are PhD students, we are lecturers, we are professors, we're writing papers. Who is going to read our papers? Who's going to be interested? Of course, you know as well, it's not just that, what do we want? We don't just want that they read our papers, right? What is the ultimate objective for our point of view? Is that they cite our paper, right? This is why we're going to Scopus. So our H index is going to go up. So our citation count is going to go up. So we're going to get this promotion and get, maybe a better salary or more money for our research or for hiring new PhD students, etc. So the citation is important. Before somebody cites you, you must find your paper, read your paper, understand the contribution, and cite you. So that's a lot of motivation we need to create, right? And who is going to do that? Well, researchers, maybe engineers if they apply what we are doing. But let's be honest, who is reading papers? PhD students, right? Because they are the one with the biggest pressure. They have only 2, 3, 4 years to finish their PhD. So these are the people you're going to write for mostly. These are the people who are going to cite your paper if they find it useful and interesting. So write your paper, remembering that you're writing for these guys. Make it useful for them to reuse your research, to continue their research. You see? So it's not a big, absolute, nice idea of this is a good paper. No, it is a practically useful paper for the readers that you must write. Now, what about the venue? The venue is generally important, right? You know that I mentioned Scopus. Usually people tell you, are you going to submit to this conference? And you're asking, well, is it indexed? So is it going to be of value for me, right? So there's some objective elements for that. You want to publish in a venue which is visible, which has good reputation. In particular, we know that there are a lot of, very bad conferences and journals that are just trying to attract papers to make money. So they have no interest in science. There are many such cases in the news, so we should definitely avoid those. But behind the visibility and the reputation, objectively, what we should be looking for is the readers. So is to address a community. And the community is going to tell us about the readers, but is also going to imply back a few rules about the style, about the language, about the presentation of the paper. So when you're thinking about the venue, yes, you can think about the visibility and the reputation of the conference and the journal, but what I recommend is you also think about who you are talking to. Who are you writing this paper for? Who is going to read your paper? Which community? And therefore, what are the rules of this community? Interestingly, I didn't spend a lot of efforts in my life trying to publish in very visible and highly ranked venues. And that is because of my training when I was at MIT. When I was at MIT, I realized nobody really cared about the reputation of the conferences or the journals, because MIT people are very self-confident. And they thought they are smart enough and people would come and read their paper if it's from MIT anyway, even if they publish it in the local newspaper. And that's probably true. I mean, those MIT researchers, they are really smart. And if they write a paper, you want to read it. You want to know what they are thinking about. But it also made me recognize that sometimes, even if it's not in the right venue, in a big venue, your paper can have a lot of citations. And I had a surprise with this paper, which is on the screen here. I wrote with people from SAP and my PhD student. So Songyi is my PhD student and Daniel is a researcher at SAP. And we wrote about mobile phone traces, how to make them anonymous, how you can actually find out a lot if your telco is recording your mobile phone position. I can know everything about you, where you took your lunch, whether you went to the bank to withdraw money, and whether you spend it immediately by going to a mall or something like that, right? Everything is in your mobile trace. It happened that we presented it at a workshop on privacy preservation in the SIG-IR conference. No big deal. I mean, it's a very good conference, but the workshop is a minor workshop. We were happy to be there to share our ideas. We got lucky. There were some people, some journalists there from the US. They published a paper in some US magazine. Then the Singapore magazine picked this, the line here from Today Online, which is a Singapore newspaper, picked it up. And several journals around the world, but you know, journals like Jakarta Post or Compass or things like this, they published something about our paper, and the citation count started to go up. I mean, it's not very big, but you know, in a matter of a few days, we got 40 plus, you know, citations by researchers just because it was picked up by the news. So what is important? Who are your readers? How they know that you have published that, and why it would be interesting to them, you know? So think about your readers, think about your audience, reach out to your audience, write for your audience, write your paper so that they're going to want to read it and cite you. So now let me go to the second part of the presentation, where I'm going to go a little bit more into the structure of the paper. But I must say that this is specific possibly to the community you are talking to, because different communities have different styles. Let me give you an anecdote. I told you I'm doing research with some physicists. I don't know if you have done that, if you have worked with physicists, but I was very shocked to see that when they write the list of reference, you know, the references at the end of the paper, they never put the title of the paper. They just put the name of the authors and the journal. You say, how do you know what the paper is about? I say, then you go and look in the journal. So I wrote my bibliography, they remove all the titles. I say, why are you doing that? You know, different style, different community, different style. So what I'm telling you here is mainly from computer science, data analytics, AI point of view. Some things may vary. So these are not rules that are carved in stone. These are just suggestions for discussion. So what are the elements of a paper? Well, the language, obviously. We need to be seriously looking into this issue. The style, very important. The structure of the paper. And I'm going to come back on references because I think this is super important as well. So let's look at these four aspects. Generally, when you write a paper, keep it simple. You know, don't try and overdo it. Actually, probably your, you know, English teachers, Indonesian teachers, everybody telling you about how to express yourself has probably told you, make it simple. It's about communication. So if you keep it simple, it's easier to say, it's easier to be heard. If you keep it simple, it's easier to write without mistakes. It's easier to read for the people. But of course, make it purposeful. Make sure you know why you are writing a sentence. Don't write a sentence that has no objective, that has no purpose. Don't write a sentence because it looks good. Write a sentence because it serves a certain purpose. Be grammatically correct, but most importantly, use the grammar to make sure that you are semantically correct. So use the grammar to make sure that what you are writing is what you mean. You know, sometimes we write something and we actually don't mean it. We just write it because it looks good. Let's not do that anymore. Instead, let's write simple, purposeful, grammatically correct, and semantically correct sentences. So this is the language, right? That means one of the first things we have to do when we communicate is decide in which language we are talking. So I would assume for the purpose of the discussion that we are only talking about papers written in English. Although I suppose in some cases, and actually I've done that, although I don't write or read or speak Indonesian, I've done that with one of my students in the past. We wrote a paper for an Indonesian journal on information retrieval, and we wrote it in the Indonesian language. Of course, I had to trust my student that the translation was correct. But you can do that. But for the purpose of this discussion, let's talk about things in English. It's not simple at all because English is not just one language. It's British English or American English. It could be Australian English or Canadian English or Singapore English. You know, which one do you want to pick? My preference goes to British English. So whenever I have the choice, I write in British English, and it's convenient because I'm in Singapore, and Singapore English is almost exactly like British English by the tradition of Singapore. But then again, when I was writing papers with my colleagues from physics, we submitted and we got a paper accepted in physics reviews. And the reviewer from the publisher, the editor, sent the paper back with a lot of corrections on my part because I had written in British English and they wanted American English. So we have to be aware of that, right? So I think you need to master at least one of them. The easiest is probably American English, and better two of them, American English and British English. This is pretty much what we have to do for the publications, but do it seriously. So for instance, I don't know, Adila, do you know what's the Oxford comma?
You mean the commas between the last N?
Yes, that's a funny one, right?
Yep.
So you have to choose. Are you adopting the Oxford comma or not? Of course, it doesn't matter. But what matters is that you are consistent, at least within your paper, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So now everybody's going to look at my slide and probably find that I'm not applying the rules I'm suggesting. I probably made a mistake somewhere. So look for my mistakes with the Oxford comma. But, you know, consistency is very important. Why consistency is important? Because you're making the reader comfortable. You know, if one place you use a rule and in another place you use another rule, the reader is not going to follow what you are doing. He's going to be destabilized. By the way, saying that, if you want to destabilize the reader, then do it, but do it purposefully, okay? So there's no hard rule. You can do whatever you want. Maybe the only hard rule is do it with a purpose, not just for the way it looks. So spelling, you have to set your text and grammar checker to British English or American English, right? One of them. Grammar, punctuation, etc. Right? Very important. I think it's not acceptable that there are grammatical, syntax, punctuation errors in a paper today. There are so many tools that we can use that help us to overcome these issues. So put a strong effort on that. And if I link back to what I said earlier, if you read a lot of novels and books, your English, British or American is going to improve, and you're not going to have this problem. And you're going to have more tools, a richer language to express yourself. And in fact, you're even going to have style. You know, style is a very difficult thing, right? I mean, we recognize the great writers of our countries because they have a great style, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if you are not a very good writer with a great style, right, there's a simple solution. Keep it simple. You know, write small, short sentences that are straight to the point. So some things that I suggest, actually, I impose to my students. Try to avoid adjectives and adverbs. Usually, that's an adverb, by the way. They are not very useful. That's an adjective, by the way. Well, you know about the passive voice. You know, why would you use will or the past tense in the paper? It's so much lighter and easier to read if everything is at the present tense. I do this, I do this, I do that. And by the way, the grammar is simpler, so you're not going to make so many mistakes, you know, because in English, the past tense sometimes has some tricks, right? We all learn go, went, gone, and all these irregular verbs in our English lessons. If you write in the present tense, you don't have this problem. What I recommend to my students, and this is contrary to what the literature teachers would say, is do not hesitate to repeat yourself. Because we are more in the math or computer science things. You know, if you have to write 2 pieces of code in computing that are doing almost the same thing, well, you cut and paste and you modify, right? You don't rewrite a completely different program, or you reuse libraries in computer science. So you can do that in the English text. And actually, it's going to make your text easier to read, because if it's the same, it's going to be written the same, and only the differences will stand out. So do not hesitate to repeat yourself. This is my maybe more arguable advice. Okay, if you work with me, Putu knows that we had a lot of fights recently on this. I don't want to see any acronym except maybe some really, really well-known ones in the papers. I mean, this is like, you know, why do you write GPU? I mean, it's called graphic processing units, right? Just put the whole thing. It's better, and at least go and check what it means, you know. So don't use acronyms, and worse than that, don't invent acronyms, because this is what we do. Right? We have a new algorithm. I'm going to call it XWZ, right? Why is that? Just give me a name that make me remember what it is. Again, think about the reader. Make his life easy. The easier the life of the reader, the more chance he's going to like your paper and cite it. This is what you want, right? You want that the guy who's reading or the girl who's reading says, I love it. I want to cite this paper. And in the spirit of pure contradiction, my last bullet in this list is don't use bulleted lists. So maybe in a slide you can do that, but don't do it in a paper. Don't use bulleted list in a paper. Write everything in English as sentences. This is easier, nicer to read, more pleasant, more relaxing. Now, that doesn't mean you cannot have summaries, but not in the main text of the paper. Where should you have summaries? In the figures. So what kind of figures do we have in a paper? We have figures like these graphs here with the numbers. This is taken from one paper that we wrote recently. These are figures that are giving more information than there is in the text. And then we have figures like this one, the neural network here. These are figures that are summarizing what we are saying in the text. So you see 2 kinds of figures. Some are giving more information, some are giving a summary or a visual overview of what you have in the text. So you can have these 2. The first one is usually necessary because it's usually your empirical results with your numbers, etc. The second one is a convenience. It's like the bulleted list. You say, I explain everything in the text, but maybe I put a graphic like a bulleted list for the reader to have a quick overview. But you see that both of these figures and illustrations, they should be such that if you remove them, the reader can still understand everything. So this is the key acid test for your paper. Remove all the pictures and the figures, and nothing should be missing. Every information that is important should be in the text. So the next rule, of course, is consequently, every figure should be referenced in the text. In figure 2.6, we see that. So that if you remove that figure, there's still a description in the text. Okay, so try that. Look at the papers you have written, remove the figures and see if the papers still stand. You know, if you just send the ASCII part of the text of the paper, does it still work? This is a good test. And if you do that, your paper is going to be easier to read. And also you're going to think, why are these figures there? Again, 2 purposes: more information for the graphs, or summaries that are helping the reader for the other pictures. This is how I generally, in my domain, structure my paper. It has a title, an introduction, which covers the motivation, the contribution, and it's customary, although I don't think it's very necessary, but it's a custom in my research community to give the plan of the paper in the introduction. So when I do that, I must be very purposeful, right? The motivation should be just there to make sure people start reading and are convinced. No more, no less. The contribution is super important, and the plan is just because it's the custom. Then if needed, I have a background section. I will come back to what the background is about. Related work, methodology, and then the performance evaluation, which is either analytical or empirical, and often must be comparative. Then I have my conclusion, which summarizes my contribution. You remember, contribution must be repeated, repeated, and repeated, right? And my future work. My bibliography, and maybe some appendices if there are things I cannot fit in there. I think I forgot the abstract in that series. The title. So make it catchy, because this is the first thing people are going to see, right? So I don't know if I'm good at that, but with Derry Wijaya, one of my students, she's now working in the US, in Boston, we wrote a paper called A Random Walk on the Red Carpet. So the red carpet is that carpet that people are putting for the actors in the Festival of Cannes, the movie Festival of Cannes. You have a picture of Mel Gibson on the slide here. Column, rating movies with user reviews and page rank. So we wrote a paper about rating movies automatically. This was an information retrieval and recommendation paper. So we chose to have a catchy title, Random Walk on the Red Carpet, that hints at the fact that we are using the random walk algorithm and that it's about movie, but people are curious, what is a random walk on the red carpet? And then we explain. So you can choose to have something catchy or something descriptive, or like we did here, to combine the two. Okay, but to have the catchy part, you may realize that you need to have some culture, right? You need to have read books, to have seen movies, etc. That's where the read comes back as well. The more culture you have, the more catchy your titles are going to be. The abstract must give a clear overview. So I think at this point, I must say the abstract should be the very last thing that you are writing. The abstract is basically, you know, like when you're watching Netflix, they give you a short summary of the movie. You're going to decide to watch the movie in a split second, right? So the short summary should be super good, super attractive. Same thing for the abstract. So write the abstract at the end. When everything is perfect in your paper, you come back and you write the abstract. And the abstract doesn't have to tell stories. It just tells what is in there, in particular, the contribution, because this is what people are going to need to know. The introduction is important. You need to give the sufficient background for the motivation. You need to express at a high level what is to be expected. So what is the contribution? And you need to outline. If you feel very confident, if you're a good writer, you can play with that. You can try and start with an example, be a little bit more catchy, but that comes with experience. Most of the time, I don't try that. I just stick to the minimum. I'm very conventional, and that's safe. Keep it simple. It's going to be good. Okay. If you feel stronger, you have more time, then you can improve on that. So keep the background to the minimum. Keep it simple, you know. What is the background? The background is what the reader needs to understand your paper, which comes from textbooks. So in fact, most of the time, you don't need to have a background section. You just say, I'm using the definitions and the notations from that textbook. If you have more space, you can have a little bit of background, but don't spend a lot. You know, I hate papers on, I don't know, let me take a random example. Well, let's say on the random walk. And then half of the paper is explaining to me the random walk algorithm that comes from a textbook. No, I can go and read the textbook myself. And just in case I forgot, just give me the textbook you have been using, and that's all. I can go and take a look at it, you know. And in particular, what is confusing is when it's not clear what is background and what is contribution. Are you the one who invented the random walk algorithm? No, you're not, right? So why are you telling me about it? Tell me to go and read the papers or the books by those who invented this algorithm. Oops. Okay, I think I'm out of order here. I'm missing something. Let me see. Okay, let me talk about it. So you should present your work, which is the methodology. I think the slides are a little bit out of order. And then you should do the performance evaluation. So performance evaluation is either analytical or empirical. In our case, most of the time it is empirical. So we're going to run experiments and do measurements. And we're going to want to conclude that what we have done, at least in some aspects, is good. But that's impossible. There's no such thing as something is good. There is better than or worse than, but there's no good in most situations. So we must compare. Our performance evaluation should be comparative. And by the way, we are scientists. So we are not engineers. The question we are asked is not build that bridge. The question we are asked is, what should you do to build a good bridge? And if we write a paper saying, don't do it this way because it doesn't work, this is scientific information. So negative results, like it doesn't work or is not as good, are important results in science. Of course, we know that if we do better than others, we have more fame, but we can also tell about the things that don't go well. Related work, there's a lot to be said about related work. Related work is not just a summary. First, you find the papers, then you read them, then you summarize them, and then it starts. You put them in BibTeX, but then you have to analyze them and find out what are the important features that you're going to use to present this related work. And the objective of a related work is not a summary, it's a synthesis. You must synthesize the existing papers with the purpose of saying my work, my contribution makes sense because of what people have done before. It is not completely crazy idea. Remember what we said about the fashion? You make sure that the fashion you are presenting is wearable, that it corresponds to the season, to what people want to wear, but that it has new ideas. So you show that your work makes sense, is new, but is in line with the existing related work. So this is a very complicated process. I spend at least 1/3 of the time on a paper working on related work. 1/3 is the methodology, 1/3 is the experiments, 1/3 is the related work, at least. So the methodology, one of the problems you have here is sometimes you have space limitations, right? So you want to do two things at the same time. You want to give the outline of your idea so that it's clear. And you want to give sufficient focus so you highlight the important things. So this is, again, a dilemma, a paradox you have to deal with. How to strike the right balance between giving an outline and giving the focus. Well, again, the solution is to keep in mind your readers. Why are you presenting the methodology? Most likely because you want them to reuse it. So make sure you give enough information so they can reuse it. Why? Because your work should be reproducible. This is a basic principle of writing a paper. Don't write a paper if you are hiding something, if you are not giving your data, or if you are not sharing your algorithms. So use archive, GitHub, put the data in technical reports, or the details, etc. This is science. There's no secret, right? If it's secret, it's not science. Science is about sharing knowledge. Share your code, share your data, share your theorems, share your proofs. But sometimes some implementation details are not useful directly in the paper, so you put them somewhere else. But make sure they are available everywhere. The conclusion of your paper, you should record the takeaway message, which is essentially the contribution. Make sure people leave your paper knowing what your contribution is, because that's when they are going to decide to cite you, right? They finish, they say, oh, this was the contribution. Okay, I'm going to cite them for this. Future work, what I tell my students is don't write any future work if you're not thinking of doing it yourself. There's no point, right? People write, and we could do this and we could do that, but nobody's going to do it. So just scrap it. Don't worry. Write it if you really believe you're going to do it. The references, well, pay attention. You remember the future, the related work is super important. And people, if you do a good job, they're going to look at your references. So they are going, you know, as a reviewer for conferences and journals, when I make a decision on the paper, is usually based on the related work and the references they are giving me. So respect the readers, respect the reviewers, write the references correctly. What do I use to write my papers? I use LaTeX and BibTeX. I want to collaborate with my co-authors, so I use Overleaf. For the language, I can choose British or American English using Grammarly, so I have no excuse if I make mistakes, grammatical or even stylistic mistakes, because Grammarly gives you advice for the style. And when I'm thinking with my collaborators about the paper, I'm using something like Xmind to organize my thoughts, you know. So these are the tools that I recommend. They are very basic tools. Everybody should have Overleaf, Grammarly, and Xmind. Overleaf contains LaTeX and BibTeX. If you want to follow up on what I told you today, you can read these different sources. So I will share the slides with the organizers so that they can give you these sources. My colleague Terence Sim gives super good presentations on how to write papers. There's a book by a researcher formerly from Singapore, Jean-Luc Lebrun, on how to write scientific papers. The craft of writing efficiently is that Chicago professors I showed you earlier, and talking about presentations rather than papers. So for talks, you can look at How to Speak by Patrick Winston from MIT. But let me conclude with a more general point of view, which is the gist of the message I want to carry today. You remember I told you, read, 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 think about your readers, find co-authors like you are playing music, put your work in a broader context. The broader context I'm talking about is what we would call liberal arts. You know, don't be just a scientist. Think about the society, think about arts, think about humanities. Actually, you guys are very lucky because you come from a country which has a rich tradition in all these branches. You have scientists, you have artists which are well known around the world, and you are strong in humanities. You have a rich culture to study, literature, painting, architecture, etc. The Latin, it was Latin, actually from North Africa, Carthagines. The Latin writer, Terence, said in one of his stories, I'm a human and I think nothing human should be alien to me, which means as a person, as a professional, we should embrace everything human, the society, the art, the literature, what people care about, their well-being, and so on. This became the motto for the French Revolution. And this theme that liberal arts should complement technology was noted by Isaac Asimov. You know Isaac Asimov, you may have read some of his books. He's a very famous author writing about robots and AI and things like this. And he said basically that, you know, machines should be complemented by arts and humanities, or should take care, how we use machines should take care of arts and humanities so we can have a happy life. This was in 1990.
So I've said this before, I thought it was worth repeating. It's in Apple's DNA that technology alone is not enough. That it's technology married with liberal arts, married with the humanities, that yields us the result that makes our hearts sing.
So in 2011, at the launch of the iPod 2, Steve Jobs repeated what Isaac Asimov had said in 1990, or what Terence had said in 163 before our era. So this idea is not new, but still we tend to be stuck more and more into our specialized corner. So my message today is consider the liberal arts. Don't be just a computer scientist or an information system technologist. Read novels, look at paintings, go to the theater, listen to music, play jazz, because it's going to be useful for you to create a style, to learn to communicate, to learn to work with others, and to focus on what matters rather than on the form. For your information, NUS as the Yale NUS College, which is a liberal art college where students are studying all these things together. And NUS is opening a new liberal art program where you can be doing computer science with literature, with music, etc. So in my opinion, there's a strong comeback of liberal arts. And as at University of Indonesia, you are in a very good position to do that because you have many other faculties you can work with. So what should you do tomorrow if you believe me? Or maybe tonight? Go and buy a random book, a random novel, and read it. And go and talk to your colleagues in the other faculties and start working with them on new projects. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Stefan. I usually say, let's give him a virtual applause. Thank you very much. This is very inspiring. Even I see myself gaining a lot of from your message. But let me give opportunities for the audience to pose questions. I think there are a few already. I think there's one question on between text and images versus videos. I think the message is different when you write compared to, for example, watching videos. What do you think about that in terms of communicating science, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So the different media serve different purposes. And I don't think we are yet in a situation where written communications are going to disappear. That's why I like to look at the history of science and knowledge and the philosophers. Socrates, right? Everybody heard about the great Greek philosopher Socrates. He was complaining that books, which were manually written at the time, there was no printing press, but he was complaining that books will make students stupid, because if things are written in the book, then you don't have to remember them anymore. This is the same criticism that we are hearing about, videos versus printed books today. But I think the reality is that these different media have different purposes. And because I thought about this, if I had to give a presentation today on how to give presentations, maybe I would have focused on a few different matters. So indeed, a video or a presentation does not have the same constraint, the same requirement as a text presentation. And today I was specifically talking about papers.
Okay, but I think there's one question on typically when you write papers, then what you cite or you put in the references are other papers. Now, with the, I think there are also, but some actually may ask, whether it is acceptable to also, for example, cite or put in a reference videos, for example.
Yeah.
Would that work in the current scientific community?
I think it's fine. There's just one thing you must be very careful about. If you cite something on the internet, put the link and put the date at which you have visited it. Because the page you see today may be very different tomorrow, right?
Right.
So there's a format for citing videos and web pages in a paper. And the most important is to say, this is the link, this is the date visited. Okay.
Right.
Now, you can do that. The only question is, what is the custom in your community? And what is the purpose of this citation? You know that citation, as I said, the references are there to show that your work is in line with the related work. It does not ignore it. It takes it into account, and it's original with respect to it. So you are talking to the work by this community.
Right.
A video is probably not yet a paper that they have published.
Well,
but if it's a video by one of your fellow researcher whose work you want to extend, yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Okay. Yeah. So right. So let's move on to another question. So, some of the audience here are probably students who are starting their research, or maybe early career researchers. So I guess you've been there for a long time, but there has to be a long time ago that you started somewhere, right? Now, can you tell us your experience, for example, in terms of writing or producing scientific papers for the first time? So what are your challenges, what are your difficulties, and how did you overcome those?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is a very, I didn't think of it this way, but indeed, now that you're asking the question, this is very interesting. When I was doing my PhD, I immediately encountered the difficulty that I'm trying to discuss about the related work and the contribution and the community and your readers, because I was proposed to work on a topic by my supervisor that was at the convergence of two domains. And that's how you get some original ideas, right? You take two things, you try to combine them. But then I had a difficulty because I didn't know what was the community I was to leverage. I had two, and they didn't know each other. So I had to create a very robust related work section to show that to every community that I know what they have been doing. So this is one part of the answer. This was the difficulty. So one of my answers to this question is focus on related work and background. This is super important. You probably tell your student, Adila and Pancha, to do a survey at the beginning of their work, right? This is the reason why. It's like the stepping stone. We're going to build everything on this, right? So this must be there. And then the second is an anecdote. After 2 or 3 years in my PhD, my supervisor asked me to give him a report of what I had done. And of course, I was very nervous. And I wrote, I think, 30 pages. And I gave to him. And a few days later, he came back and he said, look, that sounds really good. If you actually explain what you are writing in this document, your 30 pages will turn into 200 pages. And you have got your PhD. You're done with your thesis. Why? Because what I forgot is to write the simple stuff. I was focusing on the complicated solutions that I found, but I forgot to present it, explain clearly, etc. And that's what I did. I took the 30-page document. I expanded everything by explaining to my readers. My supervisor had told me, write for the next PhD student, the one who's going to follow up after you graduate. And I wrote for this guy, and everything was becoming clearer. And in no time, I had my 200 pages thesis. So it's not about complicated stuff. It's about being simple, clear, purposeful, right to the point, and about thinking about your readers.
Right, great. So I hope that gives an idea, right? So because a lot of people here, maybe they start their work, or they just beginning their research, and they always find this difficult. And sometimes for Indonesians, especially because they don't have, they're not that acquainted with the research that a lot of people are doing in the world. So they're sometimes finding it difficult to get started, and I think this is very useful. And just, I think we could all remember that Stéphane was like us, like in the beginning, right? So it's a good thing to know.
Oh,
Now,
for always, right? I mean, I'm not the native speaker of English, so I had to learn and write technical stuff in English, which I wasn't trained to do at all. All my math and computing classes were in French, So it was hard. I know how hard it was.
Yeah. Thank you. So that's good. I hope everyone gets something from here. And now the next question is regarding the readers. Now, we are in computer science field, and depending on the venues, as you said, we target our writing to the readers. If we talk about a journal, then I suppose the main readers are the reviewers, for example, or one of the readers, right? And then on the other hand, so for these, sometimes we write very technical stuff. On the other hand, writing to other people, like laymen, like journalists, high school students, for example, it will be a different kind of writing. So do you have any experience or tips on that? Like, you're talking about the same thing, but no, but the readers that you're talking to are different.
Yeah. If I push it to the extreme, I would say that most of the time, in my experience, we are always overestimating the technical capabilities of our readers. So even if you're talking about the reviewers or the PhD students who are going to read your paper, it is always better if you are able to give a clear message, as clear as possible. So now, you don't want necessarily to write your papers all the time as if you were writing for Compass. But if you are able to do that, it will not harm you, because it will make things clearer. So the objective is not to write for Compass, but any effort in this direction is going to be useful, in the spirit of making sure as many people as possible understand what you are trying to do. And again, I repeat, in my experience, every time I have assumed, oh, I don't need to explain this because the reviewer or the reader surely knows, I had a question. I don't understand what you were saying here. They didn't know. We're so entrapped in our own world that we forget to explain, right?
Right. Great. So let me open some opportunities for the audience. Does anyone want to raise a hand and ask your question directly to Stéphane? Anybody? Okay, let me check whether we have something from here. Okay, so if not, then let me just put one more questions to Stéphane. I think you had experience with Indonesian students, right? Indonesian students, some Indonesian students have studied under you, and in your observation, what do you think is the striking weakness of Indonesian students in terms of writing research? I mean, and what do they have to improve the most? I mean, in particular.
Okay. I once tried to read an Indonesian novel in Indonesian. I couldn't go further than the first sentence. I took the dictionary, tried to translate the words, and even translated word by word, it didn't make sense. Why is that? Because there are a lot of phrases and expression. The Indonesian language is very rich. It's a special culture. It actually has a lot of richness, and it doesn't translate, word by word very easily. So this is an advantage that the Indonesian students have. They come from an environment which is very rich in terms of arts and literature. So the liberal arts. The education system has these components. But consequently, they will struggle with, maybe the more American model of keeping things very simple, making sentences without adverbs and adjectives, the direct voice. And I can relate to that because it's the same in Europe. In some cases, the passive voice is a very recommended artifact, in writing with style in French. But if you want to keep it simple and let's say American, then you give it up, So this is the main effort. So that's why I started and I insisted throughout my talk, read, and read American and British books so that you familiarize yourself with other cultures. And then the result is that you're going to be twice as strong because you're still equipped with your own culture and your own cultural baggage, and you have learned the new one. And now you can combine them and create something. It's just like related work. You put your feet on some strong foundation, your culture, the Western culture, which is the standard for research papers. And based on these two things, you create something new. Again, convergence of new things.
All right, great. So I had a similar experience. I when I went abroad, and
I know.
I remember the first time I wrote sort of a report for my thesis. My supervisor, said, "Well, these 10 pages are not useful because I wrote too much and too flowery." So that's all right. Okay, so let me just give one more chance to the audience. Does anyone have a question? Okay,
You may unmute your mic if you like to ask a question.
Yes.
Audience. Yeah, please.
Okay, I don't see anybody. I guess some of the questions have been read by
Right.
me. Yeah. So if there's not a question, then I suppose we could end this session. This is very interesting and inspiring. I didn't realize. I noticed that when you said you also read a lot of books outside the subject in particular, including novels and things like that. And then I remember that I also did read a lot of novels, and I guess that influenced me in my writing as well. So that's very useful suggestion for everybody. And right, so other than that, I hope everyone gets a lot of things new or reinforce some of the things they've heard before. Hopefully with that, we could, everybody could improve their writing, could improve their research, and everybody could go forward together. All right, so with that, I thank Stéphane for the time, and I'll return the time to Pancha.
All right. Thank you, Pak Adila.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen, for the very instructive and inspiring talk. Lots of insights and analogies, especially like the research's passion and liberal arts parts, experience things beyond our domain, including the humanities. So thank you. And thank you to Pak Adila for moderating the fruitful discussion. So I hope everyone enjoys today's episode of Research Talk and learn a thing or two about doing and writing research in computer science. And thank you for joining us. So I'll see you in the next Research Talk. All right. So,
All right.
Okay. Bye.
Okay.
So,
Let's give everyone virtual applause.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you
Perhaps
so much,
before
Stephen.
we end the session, let's take a minute to take a group photo.
Yeah.
As usual. Okay.
Right. Right. I'm gonna count to 3. I think there are 10 pages here on my screen. Let's see now. Okay, on the first page. 1, 2, 3. Second page. The third page. Fourth. Fifth. Sixth. 7. Okay, that should be the last one. Okay, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Stephen.
Okay. See you next time.
Thank you.
See
Thank
you
you.
again.
Bye bye.
Yeah,
Tutu.
Thank you very
bye-bye.
much,
Everybody.
Professor.
Thank you, Stefan.
Thank you so much.